by way of a show of hands, how many of you here have never ever heard of a PIA, a Privacy Impact Assessment? Okay. How many of you here wish they had never ever heard about a Privacy Impact Assessment? Yeah, okay, you're in good company. TRM has done hundreds of PIAs, and through that experience, we have been able to get a lay of the land, identify common issues amongst our clients, and identify particular areas of interest today that might be relevant to you. A Privacy Impact Assessment is first and foremost a process. PIAs are often referred to as reports. And while the process culminates or results in the report is simply the end, the product of the process. It is the underlying process of a PIA that is most critical. If performed correctly, a Privacy Impact Assessment should help you mitigate privacy risks in the same way as an environmental assessment, environmental impact assessment, would help you identify the environmental impacts associated with a program or service. PIAs are also an obligation. PIAs are not just, however, for public sector clients and institutions. PIAs are a best practice, and in fact, they're used both in the public and private sector as a means of ensuring that services and programs that are using and collecting personal information are rolled out in a manner that is privacy positive and privacy sensitive. PIAs, whether you do them or not, serve as a record of decision. They are evidence of due diligence. And this is an important point to make here. When something goes wrong, not if, but when something goes wrong in your institution, the first question that will be asked of you, or at least of your deputy minister or CEO or CPO, will be, did we do a privacy impact assessment? If you did, and you have one on hand, that's great. If you didn't, you should at least have a record of decision on hand as to why. Okay? A PIA is a process, it manages risk, it's an obligation, it's a best practice, and it's a record of a decision. Things to keep in mind. Hopefully, the parable I started with speaks a little bit to why a PIA is important. The truth is, understanding the importance of a PIA can be difficult in the abstract. It's only often fully understood. The benefits of a PIA are only fully understood as we move through the PIA process, when risks that we didn't know existed are identified and risks that we thought might be there are properly addressed and mitigated. Suffice to say, though, a PIA is important because the potential impacts of a privacy breach on both you and your organization can be dire. But the impacts on the individual are just as dire. Your reputation, embarrassment, loss of freedom, loss of employment, financial harms, physical harms. These are all real examples of the results of a privacy breach. So why is a privacy impact assessment important? Because privacy matters, and privacy is important too. In my opinion, PIAs should be initiated and performed by program areas. The people who are doing and delivering programs and services, the people who are closest to the personal information they're collecting on your behalf. Okay? PIAs start by gathering information. We go around and we ask a lot of questions. We gather documents about the program, what you're doing and why. We interview important people, information managers, IT managers, lawyers, program officials, policy wonks. All of that information gathering results in the takeaway of information, which is then used to determine the potential privacy impacts of the program you're delivering. PIAs obviously have to have a listing of personal information. When we talk about privacy here in Canada and privacy under the Privacy Act, what we're really talking about is information privacy, right? The handling, the treatment, the processing of people's personal information. And so critical to a PIA is an inclusion of an inventory of sorts of all the personal information you plan on collecting, using, and disclosing. Not just a laundry list, not just a data dump, but a description of the data flows as well. So where we get into the details of a privacy impact assessment, having listed the elements that we're going to collect, it's important to follow those information elements throughout their life cycle. This means describing data flows in tables, what we collect, why, who uses it, why, who we share it with, why, and how long we're retaining that information for. It also requires a description of business processes that support the flow of that information. All this leads us to the detailed compliance review that you or your privacy professional should be undertaking on behalf. This is the line-by-line evaluation of your program vis-a-vis the law, okay? Finally, a good privacy impact assessment ends with risk identification and an effort to describe the undertakings you intend to take to meet or mitigate those risks. A PIA that simply identifies the risk but with no action plan on how to address them is not a good PIA. As I mentioned, TRM, we as an organization do hundreds of PIAs every year, and there are certainly some recurring themes here that I think are worthy of mention today. There's only three, possibly more, but we can open it up to discussion. The first is about authority in contrast to consent. Federally, public institutions federally are required to ensure that they have legal authority to collect personal information. In other words, for a program to collect, for a department and institution to collect personal information, they must have the legal authority to do so. That doesn't mean express legal authority. It doesn't mean a line, a provision in the act that governs your institution that says, and yes, you can collect the date of birth, okay? It means that you have the legal authority to undertake the program or initiative that you're launching. And equally importantly, that each piece of personal information you intend to collect or use or disclose for purposes of that program is demonstrably necessary, okay? In other words, don't collect more than you absolutely need based on your legal authorities. This is very different. This is very, very different than the privacy regime for private organizations. Privately, in Canada, most institutions are governed by PIPEDA, an act which is a little bit newer than the Privacy Act, and as such, based on consent. So unlike the Privacy Act, which requires legal authority, privately, institutions only require consent. I asked you if I could collect your personal information, you agreed to provide it to me, I'm off to the races. But these two regimes are very, very different. And it's important underscoring this difference for public institutions. Consent does not obviate the need for authority. If you don't have the authority to collect it, you can't collect it just because somebody's willing to give it to you, okay? Because your friends, your clients, your customers, those travelers are trusting you with something incredibly important, their personal information, their privacy. And once lost, their livelihood and their trust and your work and your reputation is lost too forever.
Got a query but short on time? Email your question to info@trm.ca. Just send us your message along with details of your preferred means of contact, and we'll be in touch as soon as possible. You'll find the address at our website, trm.ca.